My lords, like the noble Lord Lansley, I've noted the mood of the House that we've come together today to bury the Fixed Term Parliaments Act, not to praise it, genuinely. Although many noble lords tell your lordship's House that they support this bill and the burial of the Fixed Term Parliament Act in the interests of democracy. And I'm sure they are honourable men and women who support the status quo in our society, who say they want to restore things to just the way they were. That's not my position. Like the noble Lord Newby, I know that the good is being buried with the bad with the abolition of the Fixed Term Parliament Act. As the noble Lord said, the majority of the world's democracies have fixed-term parliaments, countries with modern, functional, democratic constitutions, none of which adjectives can be applied to the UK constitution with or without the Fixed Term Parliament Act. A Prime Minister who can call an election with or without the support of a parliamentary majority that put him in place, or her in place, has the advantage. And, as the noble Lord Hayward said, shortening the election period would only magnify that advantage. Now, of course, that advantage can be lost, as the noble Lord Cormack pointed out to the noble Lord Newby, but it is usually significant and often decisive, giving great benefits, particularly in fundraising, so important to the outcome of our elections, the country getting the politics that the few people pay for. And, of course, in planning, the costs to opposition parties who must plan just in case without the clarity of a known timetable. Now, my political memory goes back to Gordon Brown's election that wasn't, and a living room fills to the ceiling with paper that was bought in case of the need for free post leaflets that were never used for that purpose. That's the practical politics of a growing challenger party. Nonetheless, my lords, I'm not going to go further down the route of arguing against the sense of set election times. That's not an argument I'm going to win today. I will turn instead, as many noble lords from all sides of your lordship House have, to focus on Clause 3. Many expert legal minds have and will chew over the detail. I want to focus more on the principle. Why is the government so concerned about its behaviour being judged against the standard of law? Surely that is what the rule of law is all about. Now, the noble and learned Lord Brown of Eton under Hayward says Clause 3 would ensure the courts are relieved of the embarrassment of being drawn into a sensitive area. Well, surely protecting the people, the constitution, the country from unlawful decisions is the role of the courts. We don't need them for the easy stuff. And that they've become, as some see it, more active is, I would suggest, because of the law-breaking at the centre of government becoming more extreme, the executive chafing against the limits of control from the rights won by the people over centuries of campaigning, human rights that the government is keen to destroy. This is not judicial activism, but judicial defence of the law. Now, the noble Lord Grocott notes that it was the poisonous distrust among the coalition partners that created the Act that we're working today to abolish. And I don't need to quote the opinion polls. It's a well-known fact that poisonous distrust is also the people's attitude towards our politics and politicians, a distrust that led to the desperate desire to take back control in 2016, a desire very clearly continually being frustrated by a lack of a democratic constitution and the concentration of power and money in Westminster. Unlike the noble Lord Thomas of Gresford, I don't regard novelty as being a negative term. I desperately want the novelty of democracy in the UK. But why is our politics so poisonous? I draw your lordship's attention to the recent coalition negotiations in Germany, where three parties from very different ideological starting points negotiated the formation of a government and a platform for that government. Yes, it took a little while. Talks proceeded, talks were concluded. And I note the important comments of the Noble Lord Lansley, talking about how British politics might look different, a little bit more like Germany's in future, without even a change of electoral system. And I note that there are around the country in local councils 13 councils where Greens are part of what are known as rainbow coalitions, the very kinds of structures that the Noble Lord Lansley was imagining. That's functional, grown-up democratic politics, not something we have much experience of here in Westminster, where we have a seesaw from one side to the other, parties seeking power without principles or policies attached to them. Now, it's tempting to blame individuals, and I promise you that I do, but this culture has persisted over many years. My thesis, my lords, is that the problem is the system. The checks and balances in the UK are deliberately weak because we have a feudal monarchy with occasional bits of democracy bolted on, scraps that were thrown to the people when the pressure became too great over centuries. The whole bill is an attempt to knock off a bit of that democracy bolted on and to test how far the government can get away with taking back power from Parliament, the courts and the rule of law. And I do think the noble lady, Baroness Noakes, rather gave the game away when she spoke about events of the past, about Parliament defying the will of the government. Now, I note that the noble Lord the Minister acknowledged that it was only after pre-legislative scrutiny that it was ensured that the law provided a dissolution was an automatic trigger for a defined polling date. But, my lords, what happens if there's an emergency, real or created? A pandemic? A war? What if it is said that an election can't be held in these emergency conditions? Emergency conditions that are all too likely to be real in this age of shocks, or easily created. Maybe this would be an act of obvious bad faith, but then redress against actions in bad faith is explicitly excluded by Clause 3. Now, I can feel the scoffing, although my comments very much take the direction of those of the noble Lord Rooker. But would it be so surprising from a Prime Minister who advised the monarch to unlawfully suspend Parliament? From a Prime Minister who planned to break international law and was only stopped from that by this unelected chamber? From a Prime Minister looking in the policing bill to end the right to protest and the elections bill to take over the Electoral Commission and suppress the votes of his opponents, in a promised judicial review bill to further reduce the rule of law? My lords, the Turkish thinker S.A. Tomuru Kuran, speaking about the West, said some choose to believe that their mature democracy and strong state institutions will protect them from dictatorship. She warns of dark dawns, such as Turkey has experienced, being experienced possibly anywhere. We don't have a mature democracy. We don't have strong state institutions. We are not protected. And if Clause 3 remains in the bill, we'll be even more vulnerable.